You don't know terror until you're awakened in the middle of the night to the roar of a forest fire minutes away, ready to gobble you up like a bag of Skittles in a child's hand. I watched my small town burn to the ground, with what started from the careless act of a camper who lit a small campfire to roast hot dogs for his family by the lake on a hot August night. There were warnings. No fires all week, and the fire department displayed the sign, "Fire Danger High." Even the radio constantly announced the severity of the draw and how dry the forest was, and to exercise all caution when doing anything outside that would generate heat. My family escaped the home watch blown up in a massive ball of fire and burned in just minutes as we drove away. I took the family to a shelter set up by the Red Cross, and I jumped on a fire crew being ferried by truck to establish a fire line east of town. People underestimate how fast a wildfire can travel, and this fire was spreading at 14 to 20 miles an hour. When we arrived at the planned fire break to set up a defense for the town, the fire had already scorched hundreds of acres. The town was in full evacuation mode, but many were housebound without transportation. Family pets and some horses had to be evacuated along with the civilians. As the last people were evacuated, the fire was already in the town. Houses were already on fire and the gas station at the edge of town went up in a massive explosion. The fire expanded quickly in just a few hours. We had achieved some level of containment when we felt the wind change direction, and the wind gusts became stronger. Much of our town was in burning ashes, but we kept fighting by early morning life, and the new risk was to our neighboring town 4 miles to our west. Fire departments from 6 towns and volunteers from miles away had joined us to establish a new front line of defense to save our neighboring community. In 2 days, 80% of my town was destroyed, and with helicopter water drops we were able to hold the fire. By the 3rd night, rain fell steadily and the wind finally died off. We considered it a miracle with the rain, as it wasn't forecasted. August seldom gets a good rain shower, but it was welcomed. The next day we got containment and more rain fell, reducing the dry tinder available to burn. When the emergency was over, thousands of acres had burned and many homes were lost. We were fortunate there were no fatalities. The town fire plan had paid off and everyone was evacuated. It has now been years since this fire devastated our community. My kids are grown now and our house has been rebuilt. Our town is alive and well. No one will ever forget the chilling nightmare of a firestorm that ravaged our peaceful community. The wildfire of destruction was shockingly fast. It makes you think how one day a town can be without care, and the next come close to extinction and not exist. It is a testament to the strength of a community that we were able to rebuild. The bond of the people of our town is now more vital than ever as we fought to save and rebuild our neighbors together in this tragedy. We can learn from the good things in our lives, but the difficulties bind us together. The fire watch keeps us safe from fires. But what is keeping them safe from the woods? At 15, I became a volunteer forest firefighter. I had no training or experience with fire. I had no ambition to be a firefighter. I was more just Johnny on the spot. I even thought it would be fun. I never believed this would become a chilling nightmare. After many years, my family was on vacation on Mount Desert Island, Maine, in the early 1970s. That summer I was 15, and a friend from high school joined my family for the summer. My brother was 11 months older than me, and another friend was also on summer vacation with his family. We were all hiking the mountain trails together. On this particular day, we had climbed to a fire tower that was centrally located on the island, so we would have a great view of nearly the entire island. In the early 70s, park rangers still manned the fire tower. The fire tower is still there today, but it's been abandoned for decades. Well, anyway, we hiked up to the tower having fun on the entire trail. As teenage boys with lots of energy, we ran much of the trail and then would dive into the blueberry bushes, snarf up as many blueberries as we could, and then run again, bouncing from one rock to the next until we submitted at the tower. I climbed the steel steps with the gang in the tower cabin, which is a 30 by 30 room with glass windows with a 360 degrees view. On this day, there was a ranger. He had been there several days already as the island was experiencing drought, and the woods were extremely dry. The fire stations on the island all had their Smokey the Bear Fire Danger High signs posted. So outside the tower, cabin was a 3-foot wide metal walkway that went all the way around with a waist-high railing. All hikers were welcome to join the ranger on the walkway, but were asked to stay out of the cabin in respect to the ranger who called it home for the time he stood watch. Everything was visible inside as it was a glass window all the way around. And no, there were no curtains. There was a table, a couple of chairs, and 2 cots. There's no electricity, so no mini fridge or anything like that. When we got up to the walkway, the ranger was on the walkway, with his binoculars lifted to do his eyes scanning to the east of the tower. We all stood leaning on the railing, trying to see what he was looking at. We didn't see anything. We asked him what he saw, and he said, "Not sure, but there was a wisp of smoke off the crooked road. Better radio it in and have it checked." Yeah, this was the early 70s. Radios were still the communication technology. As he communicated with the Bar Harbor Fire Department, we could see the wisp turn into a black cloud. The ranger instantly plotted a line on a map and reported over the radio. We had a forest fire at the Lake of the Woods. The 4 of us kids took off and ran down the trail. And within 40 minutes, we were at my house where we told my father that there was a forest fire on the island and could we go see the fire. He said, "Not as sightseers. You'll be in the way of the firefighters, but if you want to volunteer, there may be something you can do to be helpful." We piled into our Ford station and got as close as we could by road. From there, we hiked a fire road up to Lake of the Woods. There was already a pumper and dozens of men gathered with chainsaws and axes. The smoke was heavy and we could hear the fire. My father saw the fire chief and said he had 4 volunteers. What can they do to assist? The chief looked at us and said, "Can you carry a 50-pound pack of water? We desperately need volunteers to carry water up the trail to the fire." Forest firefighters will need a regular supply line. We would not require protective clothing as mules. Our blue jeans and hiking boots were adequate for the job. Carry water packs up to the fire and bring empty water packs back for refilling. At 15, the 4 of us were in excellent shape from playing soccer, and the trail up was only 3 or 4 10 miles of moderate grade. The pumper filled the metal water packs, and we loaded on our backs and strapped them on. We followed 10 or 12 men with packs who would attack the fire. The packs had a water squirt operated like a pump squirt gun. The hose ran to the back of the pack. We were instructed to drop our packs at the fire, pick up empty packs, and bring them back for refilling. But when we arrived at the fire, a fireman said, "We need you now on the fire. Work together, stay close, direct your water as the crew chief points. Move as a unit, do not separate." Well, that was like, yeah, we're on the line. No longer mules, we're forest firefighters. We pumped our water as directed, moving as a unit with the other men. We all ran out of water about the same time and fell back to pick up the full pack. We did this for several hours and the fire seemed contained. Trees were still on fire, but much of the underbrush was burned off. The men moved forward and entered the burn, extinguishing small blazes. The total area of the fire was about 12 acres of pine, birch, and maple mix. Granite outcroppings made navigating difficult, and before long, I was alone. Then the nightmare began. Smoke became so thick I could not see or breathe. Flames burst from what were moments before blackened brushing trees. I looked down at my feet and my boots were on fire. I sprayed them with the last of my water. I was quickly disoriented in the granite outcroppings now blocking my way. The sound of a forest fire is deafening, so you can hear nothing and not be heard. Screaming would serve no purpose. I stumbled around for a few minutes trying to move downhill. My eyes were stinging and I was fighting off panic. I then stepped out of the cloud, and they were my brother and 2 friends together in a single file. We pushed our way through the flames. Not a roaring inferno, but the fire still licking the trees until we were in clear air and could see green leaves. We made our way down to the staging area and checked out. The fire was under control and volunteers were heading home. It had been a very long day of wild forest fire fighting. In the aftermath, it was found that the fire was started by a person camping in the woods who had lit a campfire. 4 weeks later, we got a check in the mail for services rendered. We didn't know volunteers got paid. I'm a retired volunteer firefighter from Idaho, and my strange story goes back many years. It's still unexplained and just as foreboding in my memory as it was on the day I experienced it. This unexplainable forest wildfire originated near a small mountain outside our town. It probably started with a lightning strike on the dry mountaintop sometimes. This summer, we would have lightning without rain. We would call this heat lightning. Well, it was very late at night when the fire broke out. No one reported any lightning, but that is still the prevailing theory as to the origins of the fire as we were experiencing an extreme heat wave for over a week. It was a horrific fire that burned all over the mountains. What was strange is this fire seemed to have a mind of its own. It was a living, breathing fire, as unpredictable as any fire I'd ever experienced in my 20 years of volunteering as a forest firefighter. I responded to the fire scene with the brigade from our district. We assembled on the state route between the fire and our town. Let me preface this story because I'm a small-town guy with a lot of religious education, but not particularly religious. I'm certainly not superstitious or a believer in eternal damnation, but this night made me question everything. This fire is different from most wildfires because it spreads in all four directions, burning from a central point outward in a circular firewall. I know this sounds absolutely impossible. It was as if the oxygen for the flames was being fed from an air current that dropped from the sky above the mountain to push the fire out in a circular pattern. No one in my fire brigade had ever heard of such a fire. Typically, a wildfire is driven by a wind from a single direction from which we try to set up fire blocks to stop the fire's progress. But with this fire, there was no front line. We quickly decided to set up our perimeter between the town and the fire and let the other 3 quarters go unattended, as we simply needed more men and equipment to combat the fire in its entirety. As we jumped into action, emergency responders began the evacuation of the town, as the fear was that this fire had enough strength to be a significant risk to the community. This fire found more than enough fuel to burn in the dry forest, and it was being driven by an unseen hand, giving it a life of its own. It was growing independently, and any deterrent we used against it just made it grow even larger. I've never seen a fire that with every effort we put into fighting just grew taller with flames that covered the sky. It continued to march unimpeded with an insanely hot heat. We were doing everything in our power to contain it, yet it still progressed. As I fought the fire through the night, I could hear an unnatural singing. It was as if a choir was inside the fire. It was conducted as if by a director's baton. I wasn't the only volunteer to hear it. We were shouting to each other, "Do you hear that?" As the fire grew, it pushed us back. We were facing a massive wall of flame, and as the flames rose higher, the choir raised its voices louder and louder. It was as if the Mormon Tabernacle Choir was singing. It was so clear, yet no words could be discerned. The emergency responders had evacuated the civilian population. As the fire pushed us into the town, we knew inevitably the fire would consume the town in a matter of a few short hours. We tried our best, but this beast had the upper hand, and this is where it gets really spooky. I watched as the fire leaped towards the old church, lit like a blowtorch aimed at the sky. The flame shot straight up the steeple tower skyward in an unimaginable blue intensity. It didn't take seconds to burn the church to the ground, and at that moment, it began to rain. It started with a couple of heavy drops and turned torrential. Smoke became arid and suffocating, held down by the rain. When we finally assessed the damage, it appeared the only loss was the church. The rest of the town remained miraculously unscathed by the fire. How is it possible to explain such a freak occurrence?